Welcome back to part 2 of our 21-foot aluminum sun tracker party deck restoration. In the previous episode, this boat practically stopped being a boat. We completely stripped it down, removed the old floor, tore out all the carpet, dismantled the interior, rebuilt the engine, and started bringing a boat that had been sitting neglected for years back to life. But once all the old plywood was removed, the real inspection could finally begin. That's when the hidden problems started to reveal themselves. It quickly became obvious that this boat needed much more work than we originally expected. Several parts of the aluminum structure had been damaged, previous repairs were far from professional, and some of the hardware looked like it had simply been installed without any real plan. Every damaged section had to be repaired. Bent aluminum supports were straightened, structural pieces were put back into place, and everything was secured properly with new rivets. Then we found the biggest problem of the entire hull. Around the drain fitting, the previous repair appeared to have used a copper component. Copper and aluminum don't mix. Over time, galvanic corrosion had severely damaged the aluminum around the drain opening. The first step was removing all the corrosion until clean aluminum was exposed. Once I knew the actual extent of the damage, I installed a new, larger drain fitting and sealed it properly using Sikaflex 291 marine sealant. With the structural repairs finished, it was time for one of the least enjoyable parts of the entire restoration: surface preparation. After removing the carpet, a thick layer of old adhesive remained on nearly every aluminum surface. Originally, I wanted to completely clean the aluminum, polish it, and leave the bare metal exposed. But it quickly became clear that not only would that require an enormous amount of work, it would also make the floor extremely hot under direct sunlight. The adhesive was incredibly stubborn. I started with an 80 grit flap disc. It worked, but the progress was painfully slow. Switching to a standard 80 grit grinding disc made a huge difference and sped up the process considerably. Once the heavy glue was removed, every surface was sanded with a random orbital sander. Any areas that would remain visible received a finer finish using 150 and 220 grit sandpaper. It was one of the dustiest and most time-consuming parts of the project. But it's exactly these details that determine how good the finished boat will look. While working on the floor, I also upgraded the boat's safety systems. The original bilge pump setup wasn't something I trusted, so I decided to replace everything. A new bilge pump, a new float switch, a separate high water alarm, and a new control switch were installed. Every electrical connection was rebuilt using properly crimped marine terminals, creating a much more reliable system. The emergency high water sensor was mounted above the main float switch. If the water level continues rising because the pump can't keep up, the alarm provides an early warning before the situation becomes serious. The next major step was rebuilding the floor. Once the old plywood was removed, it became obvious that the front section had already been repaired sometime in the past. The plywood had almost completely rotted away, and some of the aluminum framing had also suffered damage. For the new floor, I chose high-quality 3/4-inch exterior-grade plywood. Many people immediately ask why I didn't use marine plywood. The reason is simple. The real protection comes from proper sealing, not just the plywood itself. Every surface, edge, and end grain would be encapsulated with epoxy resin before being painted. The project started with the side panels, followed by making accurate templates. To create them, I used thin plywood strips and hot glue. It's a simple method that allows you to reproduce complex curves with excellent accuracy. One tip if you decide to try it yourself: use the straightest strips you can find. If they're uneven, you'll spend much more time making corrections later. Once the templates were complete, all measurements were transferred to the new plywood sheets. The original plywood panels that could still be reused were also restored. The remaining carpet was removed, both sides were cleaned and sanded, and damaged mounting areas were repaired. I enlarged the damaged sections, filled them with structural adhesive, and allowed everything to cure completely. After that, every wooden component was coated with epoxy resin. Special attention was given to the edges and end grain since that's where water usually finds its way in first. Once the epoxy had cured, I applied the first coat of Sherwin-Williams Forte paint. Before installing the floor permanently, I also painted the lower storage compartment because it would become almost impossible to access after assembly. Then it was finally time to put everything back together. Every floor panel was installed over Sikaflex marine sealant and secured with structural screws. Hopefully, this will be the last time this floor ever needs to come apart. With a combination of epoxy, waterproof paint, and marine sealant, removing it in the future won't be an easy job. After the floor was installed, I temporarily reinstalled part of the seating so I could mount the helm console and move on to the electrical system. The main engine harness remained original, but every wire under the console was inspected, tested, and verified to be in good condition. All switches and electrical connections were rebuilt. I also divided the electrical system into two separate fuse panels. The first panel provides constant power. It stays energized even when the battery switch is off and currently powers the bilge pump. In the future, it will also supply the stereo memory and onboard battery charger. The second panel powers all the regular accessories, including the GPS, navigation lights, searchlight, aerator, and other equipment. At this stage, my priority wasn't making the wiring look perfect. Safety and reliability came first. I was eager to finally get this boat back on the water, so I focused on getting everything functional. Cosmetic improvements can always come later. But before launching, another problem appeared. The hydraulic steering wasn't working properly. I kept noticing small drops of hydraulic fluid near the engine. After inspecting the system, I found a leaking hydraulic hose, and almost all of the steering fluid had already escaped. The damaged hoses were replaced, and then came the long process of bleeding the hydraulic steering system. Fresh hydraulic fluid was added through the fill port while slowly turning the steering wheel from lock to lock until all the trapped air was removed. Once fully bled, the steering worked smoothly again. I also changed the lower unit gear oil. Since it was my first time doing this job, I'd like to share 2 quick tips. First, connect the pump hose to the lower unit before attaching it to the oil bottle. It's much easier that way. Second, once fresh oil reaches the upper drain hole and you've installed the upper plug, stop pumping. Any additional oil will simply flow back out. At this point, the project finally started looking like a real boat again. But the most exciting part was still ahead. The first launch, the first on-water engine test, and the first real opportunity to see whether all of this hard work had finally paid off. Stay tuned for part 3.